Number 11. Plymouth Duster. The Plymouth Duster started 1975 exactly the way it had started every year since 1970, as the A-body compact that Chrysler had built on the Valiant platform, with the 225 cubic inch slant 6 that mechanics across America had been recommending without being asked since 1963, and at a price that the compact buyer could reach without a financing conversation that lasted longer than the test drive. It sold approximately 196,000 units in 1975, a figure that placed it among the most purchased domestic compacts in the country, comfortably ahead of cars that were receiving considerably more press attention, and ahead of every compact that had been introduced with fanfare and engineering controversy since 1971. Its fastback roofline communicated youth without requiring the performance insurance surcharge that had eliminated the muscle car buyer from that aspiration. Its 318 cubic inch V8 option gave the buyer who needed the performance credential that the personal luxury coupe segment required to be taken seriously by the buyer who still thought about quarter-mile times, even if they were no longer running them. The Duster is at number 11 because 196,000 Americans in 1975 chose the compact Chrysler built on a 12-year-old platform without apologizing for it, and because not requiring an explanation for its reliability record was in 1975 a commercial advantage that the Vega and the Pinto had spent 4 years making more valuable with every service visit. Number 10. Dodge Dart. The Dodge Dart in 1975 had been building its reliability case for 12 years, one owner conversation at a time in every American suburb with a Dodge dealer and a neighbor who had driven theirs to 150,000 miles without an engine rebuild. The Slant 6 inclined 30 degrees from vertical so that its oil distribution geometry could serve every surface the engine needed to protect, had accumulated a service record that the independent mechanic who worked on one described to the next customer, and that customer described to their neighbor, and the neighbor described to the person about to choose between a Dart and a Pinto. The Dart sold over 200,000 units in 1975 by being the car that won that conversation every time it was held. Its electrical system used fuses that cost less than $1 each. Its wiring harness could be traced by any technician with a voltmeter and a service manual. Its carburetor could be rebuilt in an afternoon by anyone who had rebuilt a carburetor before. None of these qualities appeared in the Dart's advertising because none of them were the qualities the advertising department believed would close a sale in a showroom. They were the qualities that closed the second sale, and the third, and the fourth, because the first owner had mentioned them to someone who was in the market. The Dart is at number 10 because 200,000 Americans in 1975 chose the compact whose advertising nobody remembered and whose reputation nobody needed to advertise. Number 9. Pontiac Grand Prix. The Pontiac Grand Prix in 1975 occupied the personal luxury coupe position in the Pontiac lineup that the Monte Carlo occupied in the Chevrolet lineup, and sold over 200,000 units to buyers who had stood in the Pontiac showroom instead of the Chevrolet showroom and found the waterfall grille and the Pontiac badge sufficient reason to stay. Its Colonnade A-body platform was the same architecture that underpinned the Monte Carlo, which meant the personal luxury experience it delivered was fundamentally similar at a fundamentally similar price, with a different emblem. American buyers in 1975 were choosing between nearly identical experiences on the basis of which dealer's showroom they trusted and which badge they wanted on the steering wheel column. Its 400 cubic inch V8 gave the Pontiac buyer the performance credential that the personal luxury coupe segment required to be taken seriously by the buyer who still thought about quarter-mile times, even if they were no longer running them. The velour interior options gave the salesperson the tactile demonstration that closed the deal after the exterior had opened the conversation. The Pontiac Grand Prix is at number 9 because over 200,000 Americans chose the Pontiac personal luxury, and because in a market where the Monte Carlo, the Grand Prix, and the Cutlass Supreme were all selling in six-figure volumes simultaneously, the right answer for each buyer depended almost entirely on which GM dealer they walked into first.
Number 8. AMC Pacer. The AMC Pacer arrived in 1975 as the widest compact car ever built in America. wider at the rear than a full-size Buick, with a greenhouse of glass covering 37% of the body surface and a passenger door 4 inches longer than the driver's door to allow easier rear seat entry. The automotive press called it a fishbowl. They called it a bubble. One magazine called it a rolling terrarium, which was more architecturally precise than most automotive criticism managed to be. AMC had designed it around a Wankel rotary engine that General Motors canceled, which meant the 232 cubic inch inline six it received was heavier and less fuel efficient than the car's proportions suggested. American Motors sold 72,258 copies in the Pacer's debut year. That number outsold everything Pontiac had in its performance lineup in 1975. AMC chose not to make that comparison in its advertising. The GTO's buyers, had they been informed of it, would not have found it instructive. But in the specific accounting of what American buyers actually purchased in 1975, the car the press had decided was a punchline moved 72,000 units, while the cars the press was treating as culturally significant moved fewer. Number 7. Ford Mustang II. The Ford Mustang had sold 607,000 copies in 1966. The Ford Mustang II sold 188,575 copies in 1975 on a platform shared with the Pinto, with a 4-cylinder engine as the standard offering, sized to compete with the Toyota Corolla rather than the Chevrolet Camaro. Lee Iacocca had presided over the original Mustang's creation and over the Mustang II's development. The enthusiast community had opinions about what the sequence said about the priorities involved. American buyers, operating in a fuel economy environment that the 1966 Mustang had never been designed to address, chose the Mustang II in numbers that the enthusiast community's opinions had neither predicted nor could explain away. Motor Trend named it Car of the Year for 1974. Road and Track readers sent letters about that. The Mustang II's available 302 cubic inch V8 in the Mach 1 configuration gave buyers who needed to call it a performance car something to point to. The 2.3-liter 4-cylinder gave buyers calculating fuel cost something to calculate. Number 6. Ford LTD. The Ford LTD finished among the top 3 passenger cars sold in the United States in 1975, with approximately 330,000 units. It achieved this without a debut, without a film, without a cultural moment, and without producing a single advertisement that any American who saw it can describe today. The buyer who chose it had decided on a full-size car, decided on Ford, and found the LTD at the intersection of those two decisions at the Ford dealer nearest to their address. The 6-passenger bench seat, the Cruise-O-Matic automatic, and the trunk large enough for a family vacation held the same position in 1975 that they had held in 1973 and 1971 and 1969. Adequate, available, and priced within the range that the buyer had established before walking in. The 1975 LTD carried catalytic converters for the first time, the emissions equipment that was mandatory on all 1975 models, and that was producing the hydrogen sulfide smell in every American parking lot on cold mornings that every driver of a 1975 car remembers without enjoying the memory. The converters reduced performance. They also prevented the car from failing the emissions test that had become a legal requirement. The LTD carried both of those facts the same way all 1975 cars did, without the option of declining. The LTD is at number 6 because 330,000 Americans chose the full-size Ford, and because the third best-selling car in America is still, somehow, never the car anyone mentions when they talk about 1975.
Number 5. Chevrolet Monte Carlo. The 1975 Chevrolet Monte Carlo, with its single round headlights set into a colonnade honeycomb grille, was at the commercial peak of the personal luxury coupe segment. Every American personal luxury coupe was selling in significant numbers in 1975. The Monte Carlo was selling more of them than any other, outselling the Grand Prix, the Cordoba, and the Thunderbird, challenged only by the Cutlass Supreme selling from a different GM showroom down the street. Its A-body colonnade platform gave the buyer the full personal luxury experience at a Chevrolet price from the dealer network that covered more American counties than any other manufacturer maintained. Its 350 cubic inch V8 delivered performance appropriate to its proportions. Its velour interior choices gave the buyer the sensory demonstration of luxury that the segment required. Its formal roofline communicated the specific aspiration that the mid-decade American buyer had decided mattered more than fuel economy in a car that cost this much, the appearance of having arrived at a point in life where the car communicated something worth communicating. The Monte Carlo is at number 5 because the personal luxury Chevrolet outsold every competitor in its segment in 1975, except the one next door, and because selling a car on what it communicates about the owner is a formula the automotive market has never stopped using since the Monte Carlo proved it worked. Number 4. Chrysler Cordoba. Chrysler invented the phrase rich Corinthian leather. It does not correspond to a recognized leather-producing region, a specific tanning process, or a material category that any leather expert asked to authenticate it has been able to confirm exists. Ricardo Montalban delivered it in a television advertisement with the conviction of a man who had never considered the possibility of doubt. The Cordoba sold 150,000 units in 1975, its debut model year, as the personal luxury Chrysler that the company needed to build to remain commercially relevant in the segment the Chevrolet and Grand Prix were dividing between them. Chrysler had observed what Chevrolet and Pontiac were doing and produced the correct answer. Name it well, cast the advertisement correctly, and describe the upholstery in a phrase the buyer can use when explaining the purchase to someone who asks about the car. Its 318 or 360 cubic inch V8 options gave the Cordoba buyer adequate performance without the fuel penalty of Chrysler's larger engines. Its formal roofline and opera windows gave the buyer the personal luxury visual language at a price that undercut the Thunderbird. The Cordoba is at number 4 because 150,000 Americans in 1975 chose the car whose most memorable feature was a phrase Chrysler's copywriter had invented, and because that copywriter, whoever they were, understood the 1975 personal luxury buyer more precisely than any engineer who had worked on the car's suspension geometry. Number 3. Chevrolet Nova. The Chevrolet Nova in 1975 was selling in circumstances that made its sales figure worth examining twice. The Chevrolet Vega, which had occupied the entry-level compact position since 1971, had by 1975 accumulated a service record that the Nova's buyers were using as their primary reason for choosing the car parked one row over in the same Chevrolet dealer's lot. The Vega's aluminum block had produced head gasket failures at a rate that dealer service departments could document and independent mechanics could describe. The Nova's front subframe unibody, its inline-6 or small block V8, and its mechanical simplicity that any shop in any county could address had not changed. What changed was the context in which those qualities were being evaluated, and the context made them valuable in a way they had not been valued before the Vega's service record established the comparison. Its buyers were not necessarily choosing the Nova on its own merits. Some of them were choosing it because the Vega's merits had been documented in repair bills their neighbor was still paying. The Nova is at number 3 because in the year that one Chevrolet compact was becoming a cautionary tale, the other Chevrolet compact was becoming the beneficiary of every conversation the cautionary tale generated. And because a reputation built on contrast is still a reputation, and the sales figures do not distinguish between the two.
Number 2. Oldsmobile Cutlass Supreme. The Oldsmobile Cutlass Supreme sold 324,610 units in 1975 and became the best-selling passenger car in the United States for the first time in its history. The automotive press, which had been writing about the death of the American full-size car, the rise of the import, and the dominance of the personal luxury coupe segment since 1973, noted the achievement with somewhat less astonishment than the achievement deserved. An Oldsmobile from the mid-tier General Motors division positioned between Chevrolet and Buick, designed for the buyer who had decided to take one step up from the Monte Carlo without taking the full step to the Buick Riviera, had outsold the Impala. It would do it again in 1976. General Motors closed Oldsmobile in 2004. Its Colonnade A-body platform, its 350 cubic inch V8, and its position in the General Motors hierarchy as the natural next step above the Monte Carlo gave the buyer who was ready to move up exactly the car for exactly that movement at the Oldsmobile dealer that sat between the Chevrolet and Buick showrooms in every GM dealer cluster in the country. The Cutlass Supreme is at number 2 because 324,610 Americans chose it in 1975, more than any other passenger car in America, and because in every version of this story that has been told before, the Cutlass gets the number 1 position and the Impala is placed below it. Here is the argument for the other order. Number 1. Chevrolet Impala. The Chevrolet Impala sold approximately 310,000 units in 1975. That is 14,000 fewer than the Cutlass Supreme. That is the number every other version of this story uses to explain why the Cutlass belongs at number 1. Here is what those 310,000 units represent instead. The full-size American car in the second year after the oil embargo that was supposed to have ended it, at a time when every automotive publication in the country was running fuel economy comparisons that demonstrated correctly that the Impala used more fuel than a Corolla, a Dart, and a Pinto. The buyers who chose it had done the calculation. They had looked at the fuel cost, the interior volume, the mechanical record, the dealer proximity, and the price, and 310,000 of them had concluded that the full-size Chevrolet was the correct answer for their specific situation. The Impala had been the best-selling car in America for so much of the previous decade that 310,000 units looks, by comparison, like a decline. Against any other measure, imports, compacts, personal luxury coupes, 310,000 units is dominance. The Impala is at number 1 because the car every obituary writer declared finished in 1973 sold 310,000 copies in 1975 to Americans who had read the obituary and disagreed. And because the most durable argument in the American automotive market is not the Cutlass Supreme's sales record, it is the full-size Chevrolet's refusal to accept the verdict the decade kept delivering.